Hi everyone, happy Wednesday. It's Alysia and I'm very excited to be with you for our weekly online fireside chat. For those of you that weren't able to join us this past Sunday, I missed all of you last week Wednesday, but as you know, I was presenting at the World Forum on Foreign Direct Investment in Shanghai. Some very exciting things taking place in China. So it's been a busy and very exciting week for our global online fireside chat community. Once again, today we have an amazing session planned for you. We have a panel of brilliant investors joining us from across the globe, logging in to discuss the right way to raise capital from an investor's perspective. As a successful entrepreneur, one of the greatest challenges that many of us face is the need to raise capital to grow our businesses and take them to the next level. This can often be very scary and a very challenging process. But today we're going to be giving you the inside scoop on what investors are looking for and how we can go about raising capital in the best way possible. Now, I know you're all very excited, so let me go ahead and introduce you to our VIP guests before asking them to properly introduce themselves to you. Welcome to Illinois-based Sachin Batra, who's an investor, asset manager, global corporate finance expert. Welcome to California, USA-based Ken Hubbard, who's a serial entrepreneur, investor, CEO, and innovator. Welcome to California, USA-based Sean Randall, who's an entrepreneur, impact investor, and social enterprise and venture capital consultant. Welcome back to Josh Shepard, who's an equity crowdfunding specialist, an advocate for democratized finance, and a champion for our global fireside chat community. And welcome to China-based Debola Omololu, who's an innovator, consultant, investor, and entrepreneur. Now, I'm sure we'd like to hear from our investors themselves, so please can we ask you to introduce yourselves, starting with Debs. Debs, please say hi to everyone. We seem to have lost Debs there for a second. Ken, please say hi to everyone.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to Newport Beach, California. If you haven't been here, it's a lot of fun. It's like living in a resort every single day. To introduce myself, I started my first company back in 1988, sold it in 91. I found these rather interesting things called computers and got into that industry and started another company in 2008, which was the worst timing anybody could start a company, and was still able to raise $3.2 million into the company and stayed with them for 3 years before rolling out. Then I ran an angel investment network. We had investors all around the country. We ran at a higher rate of investment than any other angel group. Most angel groups put about 5% or put money into about 5% of the companies that they see. We were able to take it up to 30% of the companies that we saw. And part of that was due to a new model where we train the CEOs on pitching specifically for the investors as opposed to just pitching the company. So now I've started a new company called Capstack West, which is the easiest, fastest way to find capital, both debt and equity, online. And it's a social community where we're socializing the way that money moves between investors and companies.
Welcome, Ken. We are extremely excited to have you join us, and we look forward to learning from you today. Sean, please say hi to everyone.
Good morning, everyone, or at least good morning from California as well. My name's Sean Randolph. My work is twofold, I would say. On one side of things, I work as an advisor for a smallish VC firm based out of Washington, D.C. that does both equity and convertible debt investments. I help them in the areas of deal flow and even with negotiating terms with various entrepreneurs. And then on the more non-traditional side of things, I run a nonprofit impact investment firm called Sotec Ventures. And what we do there that's very innovative is essentially connect for-profit entrepreneurs, specifically social entrepreneurs, with philanthropic capital, being grants and donations. And something that many people don't realize is that within the philanthropic sector, there's about $865 billion in assets held by philanthropic institutions. And at least in the US, the IRS mandates that I want to say around 5 or 6% of those assets are distributed each year in the form of grants or donations of some kind to nonprofits. Well, what we've done is found a way for for-profits to also tap into that extremely cheap capital, so long as they are extremely committed to producing social and environmental impact. And if they're open to those commitments, then we can essentially facilitate the flow of capital from the public sector into the private sector as well.
Welcome, Sean. Very excited to have you join us. Josh, please say hi.
Hey everyone. Let's see here. My education's in finance and digital marketing. I've been researching crowdfunding and working in the field for the last 3 years. And I left Wells Fargo about a year ago to pursue the equity crowdfunding space to further democratize access to capital so that everyday Americans can invest and capture the wealth that have an equal opportunity to capture that wealth. And so right now we have a couple of projects going on one on microventures, one on flash funders, and then we have a real estate investment trust that is in the process of being approved. And so my whole mission is to pretty much democratize access to capital, starting here in America and then moving out to international seas.
Welcome back, Josh. Very excited to have you join us. I know Session's having some connectivity issues, so we'll just wait to get him on. In the meantime, just a few shout outs before we learn from the best. On the screen are contact details for our panelists. Please feel free to reach out to them. You know we love hearing from you, and I know these VIPs would love to hear your questions. You can always email us at inspireme@onlinefiresidechat.com. We'll do our best to include them. Given how many of you are joining us today, we have community champions managing a chat room. So if you have a question for one of our VIPs, feel free to post your question, and our champions will do their best to have it answered. A reminder, we have community champions in ever-growing meetup groups in 79 cities in over 55 countries across the globe, including in North and South America, the UK, Europe, Africa, the Middle East, India, Asia, and Australia. And I'm not going to tell them all to you today because I know you're here to learn from the best, and that's what we're going to do. If you'd like to meet up with one of your local chapters or you'd like to start your own, feel free to reach out to us via email and we'll connect you. On that note, thank you to all our champions from around the globe. You are the heart and soul of our community, and you know we wouldn't be here today without you. We are getting closer and closer to reaching our 100-country goal, and we know together we can make this happen. Thank you to all our VIP guests today for generously sharing your knowledge and wisdom with our community. Thank you to our growing family of supporters and collaborators from around the developing world for once again hosting sessions for hundreds of entrepreneurs who don't have access to the necessary bandwidth or understanding of the English language to join our sessions on their own. Thank you to all the ambassadors, ministers, ministries, UN offices, US Embassy corners, British Council offices, university campuses, schools, business incubators, Chamber of Commerce's, community centers, and radio stations and media for all your ongoing weekly hosting support and for raising awareness within your regions and communities. Thank you to everyone from our UN Women team for all your support. Once again, we're streaming across new platforms today, and we have some very exciting news coming your way, so stay tuned. You won't want to miss out. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for, I'm going to make sure to pose as many of your questions as possible to our VIP guests, and then they're going to answer them for us. Let our VIP guests sit back, relax, and have a great time. I know Debs is back with us. We'll ask him to introduce himself to you as we get through the questions. So welcome, everybody, and let's have a great time today. Our first question goes to Ken. Ken, from an investor's perspective, when is the right time to be approaching you to raise funding?
You know, I really prefer that people approach me before they need funding. I like to get to know somebody.
Thank you, Alysia.
It takes a little bit of time to get to know a company and what they're really looking for. So if I have a personal relationship with them prior to them looking for money, then that's great. If they come to me through a friend, I still go through the same process. I may shorten it up a little bit because I can ask a friend a few things. But really, we like to see people personally. We like to meet them at different events, get to know them, and then we will start talking money with them.
Thank you, Ken. Great way to start today. Debs, would you like to add anything to what Ken was saying? I think Debs is having some connectivity issues from China. Sean, would you like to add anything to what Ken was saying?
Absolutely. I think that something else that's often important and a bit misrepresented sometimes is that you'll often find founders relying on one strategy, or at least overly relying on one strategy in order to appeal to investors.
So my name is Debs. I'm dialing.
Please continue, Sean.
Yeah, you'll find founders sometimes overly relying on one strategy in order to appeal to investors, whether it's, oh, you know, I've already raised capital from a large number of angels, or we have this many users already. And I think it's important to consider that, number one, revenue tends to always be king as far as being attractive to in the eyes of an investor. But number two, it's always good to have essentially a balanced approach. Oftentimes, just because of the preferences of an investor, if you approach them and you've solely relied on just one strategy to be attractive, in the event that you didn't build or execute that strategy in the way that that particular investor finds to be appealing, then it may kind of turn them off. So essentially what I'm saying is that it's important for entrepreneurs to pursue a balanced approach in building up all aspects of their business, not just the user base or not just having a large troop of angels and things like that.
Thanks, Sean. Josh, any quick thoughts you'd like to add to this question before we jump on to the next one?
Yeah, no, I can't agree more with what the other panelists said. Honestly, the thing that I face most, at least in the crowdfunding space with entrepreneurs raising capital, is them just not having a plan, an actual plan built out. Kind of like Ken said, they're coming to me, they need the money now, and they don't have time to build out a plan pretty much, or a budget a lot of the time.
Well put.
Very well said. Thanks, Josh. Ken, we're going to jump in, ask you this question, and of course, we'd love for our other panelists to also hear it. You've met so many entrepreneurs over the course of your journey.
I'd like to add to that.
Sure, who's that? Okay, Ken, I'm sorry, everybody. We're having some connectivity issues. So, Ken, as I was saying, you meet so many entrepreneurs. What is the most difficult, challenging question you ask them up front to see what kind of meat they're made of in terms of building their businesses?
Well, I actually do something a little bit different. What I find in a good company is that the founders, or at least the leaders, are flexible. They listen, they communicate, they understand they don't have all the answers. So what I tend to do is I tend to push their buttons a little bit. I'll ask them tough questions, and then I'll ramp up the questions, and then I'll start cross-questioning. So I may go from, well, you're talking about you need $100,000, but you're also telling me that it's going to cost you $250,000 to build your prototype. Why do you have dollar issues and timing issues? And so I get them a little bit flustered. And the whole goal is for them to show their mettle right there on the spot, because I don't have a lot of time. So I need to have them step up and get in the game and not give me some kind of canned speech. So once I've gotten through that, that tells me if there's something here or if they're full of baloney. I also like to see what their messaging is. The hardest thing in the world to do is to simplify messaging, especially for any founder or any developer of a company at all. So if they can simplify their message down and get their points across to me, the neophyte, in many cases, when it comes to talking about things like life sciences or augmented reality or something like that, well, if I can get the message quickly, I know they're more prepared to step in front of other investors with me. So if I am going to invest in a company, I want to be sure that some of my friends or some of my associates would also look at investing. And if I can test their mettle quickly, find out where their gaps are, they're flexible in listening to some input, and they actually take the input to heart, then I find it's a quicker relationship and we can move faster.
Fantastic insight shared there. That's why we're here today, because I think that's ultimately the aim, that you speed the process up and you work together with your entrepreneurs to build great businesses. Sean, would you like to add anything to what Ken was saying?
Yes, I think he actually touched on something with saying that he actually intentionally sometimes work with entrepreneurs to get them flustered, get them kind of off of their talking points, and kind of see how they can flow, sharing the ins and outs of their idea, of their strategy. And it really reflects well on them if they're able to do that. And to kind of add to that a bit, I think something that is seen a little far too often in communications between investors and entrepreneurs is kind of this becoming quickly offended. You know, if you're not immediately, if an investor doesn't immediately respond with, oh my gosh, this is the most amazing idea I've ever heard, you know, there's often times where entrepreneurs are turned off, or they feel like you're underestimating me or something like that. And it's important to just understand that this is a relationship being built, and there needs to be patience on both sides, but there also needs to be just a human element. You know, allow people to grow into liking your idea, just as you need to grow into liking, you know, the specific strategy or philosophy of the investor. And so just, I think it's important to reiterate, it's not, you shouldn't be easily offended as these conversations are taking place.
Thank you, Sean. Josh, any insights you want to add here?
Yeah, no, I can't agree more with that. Entrepreneurs getting offended causes a lot of friction, and it slows down the process or ruins the relationship. So definitely communication is key.
Thank you, guys. Now we've got another talking about what you've been saying, becoming offended, and that as an entrepreneur. I think Debs is joining us from Shanghai. Debs, can you hear us okay now?
Loud and clear.
Absolutely perfect. So Debs, this next question goes out to you, and then we'd also love for you to say hi to everyone. Talking about getting offended in that, what are some of the unforgivable pet hates that you as an investor experience when an entrepreneur pitches you that just turn you off ever investing in that entrepreneur?
First of all, like you said, let me just do a quick introduction. So my name is Debs. I run Afriscaper, a platform that allows investors invest in Africa, especially African real estate infrastructure. Our target is over the next 3 years to channel about $1 billion in Africa to African real estate and infrastructure. So answer your question directly, I think at the end of the day, if you're investing in any company or person, it's always about the relationship. And I think Josh and a few other people have actually highlighted this already. The relationship is very, very key. So if you have someone who is always on the defensive and really doesn't listen to what you're saying, or believes that he knows even much better than the investor, which, to be fair, sometimes in a specific field that entrepreneur may, but you have to be open to ideas, you have to be open to questions. So if you are unable to open yourself up to criticism and to questions, then of course that relationship will not develop, and by extension you have probably lost an investor.
Thank you, Debs. Ken, I'm sure you have a list of pet hates given all the years you've been working with entrepreneurs. Please share some of them with us.
Did you say pet peeves? I couldn't quite hear your question.
Yes, pet peeves in the US, pet hates in the Commonwealth countries. Please tell us some of your pet peeves when it comes to entrepreneurs.
You know, I'm fairly flexible. I give entrepreneurs a lot of latitude. I do that for a couple of reasons. One, I know how tough it is to build a company. I also understand what their time frame is and their mindset. When I look at an early stage company, I know the guy's wearing 15 hats. He's completely absorbed. He's so deep in the trenches that he's not able to always see the light. So I tend to give him a little bit of latitude in that space. Some of the pet peeves, though, are that they think that their deck is the perfect deck for every single investor. A deck is a dynamic, always changing item. Basically, it's the gateway into your company, and you need to perform a little bit of surgery every time you show that deck to a different investor. Not all investors think the same. Every group has a different model. So you just have to be flexible on that. Some of the other things that will drive me away are the insistence from them that they are doing the right thing every time. So this goes back to flexibility. If they're insisting that the way that they're going to market is the right way, and I know it's not the right way or I see other options, I ask them about the options. And if I keep hearing them go back to their way is the only way, then I get nervous. Case in point, I was working with a company that had a new model, kind of an Uber for food at airports. You could, from your phone, while you're on the airplane, set up to have food delivered to you when you walk right out your gate. Well, it was a great idea, and they're moving forward now. But I said, you guys could probably find a platform that's already built, customize it, and you'd be up and running in months instead of closer to a year, 18 months. And their comment to me was, no, we want to own it. Well, after about 9 months, I get an email from the CEO, and he said, yes, we finally found a platform partner, and we're increasing our speed to market. Well, if he had done that 9 months before, he would have actually been in the market by then. So a lot of times the investor, and not always, the investor has some base knowledge that's very valuable. And if the CEOs or the executives can't absorb that base knowledge and don't understand what's going on, and they're not asking questions, then it tells me that they're not communicating. So a lot of times when I work with a CEO or when I start going down the road of due diligence, I ask a lot of basic questions. And those questions are actually there to lead them to something. And if they don't see where I want to take them, if they don't see that there are easier ways to do things or smarter ways or less expensive ways, then it's really a pain in the butt for me to get involved in those types of companies.
So thank you, Ken. And I think this is a follow-up question that needs to be addressed because I've experienced this a lot with entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley and around the world. Based on all your experience, and if I asked you to put your head on a block, how often would you say when investors are giving CEOs of these companies advice that percentage-wise the investors, based on experience, their years of experience and interacting with a lot of entrepreneurs, that the investors' knowledge is right and that the entrepreneurs should trust them, even if the entrepreneur believes they are right, they have to kind of just go on instinct and say this investor is giving me the best advice possible?
This is an odd one. There are a lot of people out there that are trying to give advice to companies to get a job from the company or to sway the executive team. And so I tend to ride the razor blade on this one a little bit. If an investor is giving you advice and he has a background in your space or has worked in your space, then I tend to think that's more valuable. However, if an investor or potential investor doesn't have any experience in your space, I always tend to shy away a little bit from taking their advice. I recently was talking to a company that did a beautiful app for stadium delivery of food and things like that to your seat. And they got involved with a gentleman who took some stock in the company, didn't put his own money in, but he said he was a big investor. And when he got involved, his background was in large corporate America. So he didn't understand the agility needed by a startup. He didn't understand the real marketplace. And by the time he got himself embedded, he raised a very small amount of money into the company. The next thing you knew, the company was going out of business. So, I'm careful. I think if a CEO or an executive team can discern, they can understand the difference between good advice and mediocre advice. I think that's very important. And a lot of times, however, they're swayed by somebody who speaks about money. And they say, I can raise you money or I have money. And it's hard on the executive to figure that one out. I tend to now do more background checks and more work before I even get involved with anyone. Whereas just 5 years ago, I didn't dive in that deep on the backgrounds of some of the people that were what I call circling the company.
A brilliant set of insights. I'm coming back to a series of questions. In the meantime, I know Sean's got some insights he wants to share here. Sean, please go ahead.
Absolutely. I think Ken touched on a great point, alluding to how right now the ecosystem is pretty saturated with all these different forms of advisors and supporters of various businesses, from startups, all the way up to middle market company. And I think it's important for entrepreneurs to recognize that they still need to be themselves, because sometimes you'll find that many of them are mimicking advice that they read on the millions of blogs out there that are telling you how to deal with an investor, or they're mimicking the advice of 5 other advisors that have taken on a couple percentage points of equity and are telling them, okay, deal with this investor this way. But if you're willing to be yourself, and even more importantly, be humble, be open to listen to alternative ideas, be open to be challenged, I think that will go a very long way. And so just be careful with the saturated market of advisors, as Ken alluded to.
Thank you, Sean, and that's why I love hosting these sessions, because I get to learn from the best. You've raised a series of things following on from what Ken was saying. I'm coming back to you too. Debs, please go ahead. I know you had some insights you wanted to share here.
Yes, I'd also like to speak from personal experience as well. My very first venture, after leaving paid employment, one of the challenges that I had, or my intention when I set it up, was trying to get investors with experience and all that. And one of the investors that I got was someone who worked for a large multinational telecom company. This at the time was an online store, an e-commerce store. But we ended up clashing a lot, because a lot of the advice that he initially gave, I thought, hey, he has more experience than I do. Maybe I should follow this, and maybe there's something in there. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. And unfortunately, that business crashed as a result of constant friction with, just a particular investor, not even everyone. So having the right kind of investors in your business are key. So it's not just a question of, hey, this person has money and I'd like you, or I'd like this person on my board, or just this person has experience. You have to make sure that you're selecting the right people who can give you the right advice and with the right resources.
Thank you, Debs. Now, you touched on something critically important, as did Ken and Sean, and I think this is something that needs to be addressed. Just to give you an example of what I'm talking about, an entrepreneur that I'm working with, he's already had a very successful exit. He's working on a follow-on company. He has a very high-profile investor, and with the high-profile status comes a very big ego. And recently, this investor started, for all intents and purposes, pushing him around in terms of a direction to take in the business, and it was causing a lot of friction. Ken, we'd love to hear from you. How do you draw the line with the big egos, and the more money you want to raise, you often get bigger egos involved? We'd love to hear your insights.
This one is really one that causes an enormous amount of problems, because sometimes the ego flows into the executive team as well, and they get their chest puffed up. Sometimes it creates friction. So the first thing I start with is expectations. And expectations can be documented in an agreement, and they can be fairly straightforward. For example, sometimes big egos want to be on board of directors, other times big egos don't. So you have to identify what their value is to the company. So if they bring in money, that's great, but if they're not going to talk in public about your company, if they're not going to do introductions, if they're not going to help you find more money, then that big ego is going to become a friction point. Also, matching your style to investors and finding those strategic investors. They may not be an investor that you would normally go to, but they may be somebody you can get along with, and therefore the two of you become more powerful than two individuals. Recently, working with an augmented reality company that I own a piece of, Meridian AR was looking for the right investors. So they interviewed some investors. There was a big ego in the room, and that big ego puffed up the chest of the CEO at Meridian. They felt like they could work together, that they had a lot to offer each other. However, what was really happening was something dynamic, which was the investor was using the money so he could become the CEO of the company. And a lot of us around the edges saw it, and eventually the CEO saw it, and we backed out of that relationship. But it cost us 4 months, and we burned through a lot of capital. So you really need to be aware that an ego has a value, but if it's not a game you want to play, it will slow down your company, it will cause friction, and frankly, as Deb said, it can put you out of business very easily.
Thank you, Ken. Now, very interesting insights once again. I was talking to a VC in Silicon Valley, and he was saying that there are times where he'll invest simply because, you know, there's a name behind it and it just makes sense, as you've been saying. How much of a role in the greater scheme of things do those names ultimately play in the success of a company as far as investors go? Is it a trade worth making?
In my personal opinion, it is a trade worth weighing. I would weigh the pros and cons. You know, a lot of times the C-level executives too busy, too much on their mind. They're going in too many directions, and they really don't sit down and they don't weigh the pros and cons. And when that happens, it creates problems because no one's really sat down and papered what this thing's going to look like in the future. So I don't know if that answers your question or gives you the kind of the pieces of the puzzle.
It does. It does. Sean, any insights you want to add here?
No, I think Ken hit the nail right on the head. I wouldn't add anything to that.
So, Ken, you've touched on it. I'm going to jump right in. You talked about doing serious due diligence on the entrepreneurs, and it goes vice versa. Clearly, we as entrepreneurs have to take this very seriously, no matter how many hats we wear in building our businesses. Debs, we'd love to hear from you in terms of how you've done due diligence on your investors. I know you've got investors around the globe. You're focusing on the African market. There's a lot of risk associated in terms of what you're doing, or perceptively there's a lot of risk. Please tell us how you do your due diligence on your investors.
It's interesting that you say that. So what we've, as you know, with many Africa-focused things, you have to adapt technology to ensure that you can overcome some of the challenges. Take, for instance, on the one hand, we have global investors from around the world, from Asia, from Europe, from the Americas. And one of the things is we don't know who they are. So on an initial level, we're in the process, for instance, right now of having something that allows, we're talking to a company that allows people to do like optical scans and fingerprint matching. So essentially on the first level or base level, we know who they are and we know who they say they are. And in addition to that, there's always the review of experience. Different people have different experiences. So what we try to do, especially for our large investors, whether it's high net worth individuals or institutional investors, we actually take our time and actually take, we actually speak to them on a one-on-one basis. It's a bit tough because for us, we have give or take like about over 5,000 individuals. But we actually do take our time to talk to each investor, understand their expectations, and get to know them and then explain it, what it is that we're offering. So you cannot take away the one-on-one discussions and negotiations away from everyday life. But again, like I said, you use the one-on-one conversations, add a technology layer on top of that. And of course, like everybody, in some instances, we hire third-party forensic guys or investigators just to double check things.
Thank you so much, Debs. And Ken, I know this is something you're particularly passionate about. Any insights you'd like to share here too that we could go and apply?
Yeah, when I get into the due diligence, a lot of executives like to say, hey, we've got a deal with X, or we're signing a deal, or oh, we've already got distribution. So I tend to go into the contracts with them, and I look at what the contracts say, and I look for different exit clauses and things like that. It's much more important that the CEO talks in plain English or plain whatever language you're speaking, because if they're kind of embellishing and talking about things that haven't quite come to fruition, then the due diligence process comes to a grinding halt, or the expectations were not set correctly. The investor thinks that the minute he puts money in, this company's going to go, and we find out later that the deals weren't solidified, no signatures on documents, things like that. So I think it's really important in the due diligence process for a company to have what I call their due diligence book together. It may not be paper, it may be all electronic, but what it is here are the agreements we have in place, here's the partnerships we have, here's the manufacturing process, or here's the software developing team, all of it organized so that when I get into it, I can zip through it quickly. If I need to call one of my partners or expert to ask them advice on a specific point, say for example, it's licensing of the technology, would a company pay that type of license fee for that type of technology? I want to be sure I can run through it quickly. It's hard enough getting through the due diligence process on a early stage company because there's not a lot of information there. So you have to trust your gut, and the gut is telling you something that you may not have picked up on consciously. So you have to test all those things, and if you can do it quickly and it's a good, sincere, step-by-step process, then I think the investor is much more comfortable and the risk is mitigated and the money flows.
Thank you, Ken. Josh, I know you, the entrepreneur's friend, you're very passionate about crowdfunding. Do you have any thoughts you'd like to add in terms of what Deb said and what Ken was saying?
Honestly, I think they hit the nail on the head with that.
Absolutely. Honestly. Brilliant.
Sean, Ken definitely expanded on it quite a bit.
Very much so. Sean, have you had any experience in trying to help entrepreneurs keep the due diligence process as smooth as possible that you'd like to share?
Absolutely. I think that a point that Ken, or a phrase that Ken used, was talking about how investors are looking to mitigate risk or reduce risk. And I think that's a point that entrepreneurs need to really internalize, in just understanding the dynamics as they're attempting to negotiate and build relationships with investors. It's not always just trying to highlight how awesome your idea is and how much money it's going to make and what the ROI is going to be, even though those points are important, but also recognize that the investors, one of the many primary objectives of the investor is to reduce risk. And if you can also look at your business through that lens and look at how you're employing various strategies that will contribute to reducing that risk, it will definitely go a long way in those conversations.
Thank you, Sean. And I know Josh has got some stuff he wants to add there. Please go for it, Josh.
All right, so I was just thinking about crowdfunding is definitely different. It's definitely different. Thinking about what you guys said, we really don't do that much due diligence. The platforms will typically do the due diligence, and we really just try to drive in the investments to the offerings, especially because equity crowdfunding has so little participants right now. I think there's only been about 43,000 investments in 13 months, 29 million companies out there. So what we really do is just try to drive traffic to the page and make sure that we're hitting the right audience and building the crowd.
Thank you, Josh. And following on from what you were all saying, Ken, one of the issues I think that we as entrepreneurs have, and I know you've built some very successful businesses, that from time to time, we may embellish how well our businesses are doing. We may not necessarily do it on purpose, but we want to believe that we are succeeding. And I think where this catches us up is when it comes to the due diligence process. And then the worst is that we don't realize that investors all talk to one another and that we could destroy our reputation with multiple investors rather than just one investor. We'd love to hear your thoughts in terms of this relationship between embellishing and destroying any chance we have of raising funding because we did embellish.
Oh, that's a tough question. So I think what I really like to hear from an executive is the facts. I think a lot of times the executives of new companies and even more seasoned companies, they embellish because they think we don't necessarily get it. We don't quite understand maybe their company model. We don't understand the value of the partnership, things like that. And it has a lot to do with that fine line between embellishment and helping us understand. So what I do a lot of times with, I have a training pitch deck that I put up on Capstack West for free. But in there, it speaks to the value proposition for the relationships or the value proposition for what they've accomplished. So let's say, for example, that they have 4 channel partners. Well, if you're doing a fast presentation in front of a bunch of investors and you say, we have 4 channel partners in the distribution of our product, and that's a great thing. And basically, a lot of times they want to tell me the name of the channel partner, which a lot of them are very obscure. Nobody would ever know their names. Yet they could be $1 billion company or a $500 million company. So what I try to tell the executive is tell me the value proposition of that channel relationship. So the channel reaches 1 million customers. They send out, whether it's an email or some kind of ongoing marketing, and let's say it's a product that's being sold online, and they reach 40% of their customers with a 20% open rate and a 5% click-through rate. So now I understand the value of that channel partner and how they fit into the company. Whereas if you tell me the name of a channel partner, actually, I don't even care if you tell me the name of the biggest channel partner that I know. A lot of those guys are hard to work with. It takes years to get them organized, to get the training done, to get them the product demos and everything they need. So, you know, if you're telling me a company like AT&T is going to distribute your widget, then you're going to have to tell me how they're going to do that and why that's good for you, because normally with an early stage company, it's not good for you. They're too big, and frankly, they don't want to move quick enough with you. So I hope that gives you a little insight.
Absolutely. Debs, do you have any thoughts you'd like to add to what Ken was saying?
Wow, just like Ken said, that's a tough question. Well, the thing is, well, from my experience, and I'll talk about our platform as well, it's typically just mentioning the names. And just like Ken said, sometimes it's difficult for international investors because they may or may not have heard the name of that organization. So if some company says, okay, well, as you know, ours is typically real estate or infrastructure. So if a company says one of the anchor tenants is MTN, just saying MTN might not ring a bell. But for if, on the other hand, that CEO says one of the investor tenants is MTN, and MTN has a net worth of over $2 billion. On the one hand, you could ask, or you could say he has embellished things a little bit. I mean, as long as it's true, it is a fact, that is what it is. But sometimes, again, depending on the situation, I would say a little embellishment is good, sometimes just for clarity purposes, but not to the extent where it becomes an outright lie. So, like I said, tough question, but sometimes it is necessary because we all have, especially for an organization like ours that deals with global investors. It's sometimes we take the extra step and explain maybe some relationship and all that. So it is a little bit of embellishment, but we sometimes see that it's necessary to pass across the message that we intend to.
Thank you, Debs. Sean, anything you want to add there?
No, I think they've covered it pretty well.
We're challenging you guys today. You're the best, and we're here to learn from you. So one of the things I think we'd be most interested to hear from you as experts, and Ken, we're going to direct this one at you, and then of course we'd love our and other panelists' thoughts, is often entrepreneurs underestimate certain areas that are critical to the success of their business. One of them being customer acquisition issues, underestimating competitors, unrealistic valuation expectations. Ken, do you have any thoughts in terms of a lifetime of experience and the areas of greatest danger to entrepreneurs when it comes to this?
Well, you named a lot of the areas that are definitely key areas where they fall down a little bit. The markets ebb and flow. So starting from foundational thinking, you may have a time where a lot of money is flowing into early stage companies, and so the valuations creep up, as we saw recently, as recent as last year, where Silicon Valley rates were just unbelievable in valuations, and the people in Southern California didn't want to play that game because we were seeing valuations that were 2, 3, and 4x above what we would pay or what we would want to come in at. So valuation's a big issue. The time to market is always one that eludes every CEO, and I don't mean just one CEO, I mean every CEO. Not that it's always longer, but that it's hard to put your finger on. So don't tell an investor that you know how long it's going to take to get to market. Just tell an investor that you've got a range and time, and you realize you're going to have to tweak your system to improve that, but you are realistic about what it's going to take. Customer acquisition costs are another interesting area. Most entrepreneurs have no concept of customer acquisition costs, not because they haven't read up on it, but because it's really hard to read up on something that's never been done. So if you're starting a new company, if you're coming in behind somebody who educated the market, then happy days. They've spent all their money and time, and all you have to do is tell them, hey, we're like them, but better. But it's always difficult to come up with these numbers. It's always difficult to frame the argument to an investor. So I do think that there's probably 5 or 6 major issues. One is the cost of compliance, and compliance is a funny word. I use it in a form that touches all aspects of the company, i.e. the shares and how you distribute the shares. If you're doing convertible notes, how the convertible note is put together, how you run your board. You can be very flexible in the beginning, but eventually you've got to have that structured. All of these areas in a company can create little landmines, and that's why I say it's good for a C-level executive to be fairly flexible and not always listen to everything, but trust and verify. It's all about verifying, and is that logical? It's very easy for a C-level executive to listen to 5 different people, get 5 different stories, but they can't discern, they can't figure out which one is the right way for them to go. So, one of the biggest pitfalls is not being able to find a trusted source if you've never done it before, or not trusting yourself a little bit to find the right advisors or help.
Brilliant insights. Sean, do you have anything you'd like to add to what Ken was saying?
Absolutely. I think something he touched on was, regarding to the cap table. I think that, if a founder is or founders are lucky enough to raise some initial capital and they begin working their way up the investor food chain, if you will, they'll find an increased interest in having a clean cap table. And Ken kind of mentioned this in several different applications, whether it be, you know, various agreements you have that aren't even necessarily with investors, but they have exit clauses in them, whether you've brought on a large number of angels and coming in different, you know, investment forms and things like that. It's just very important for entrepreneurs to always keep a tight grip on, you know, the terms that they're, you know, engaging this agreements are. Are they distributing a bunch of board seats? How are they distributing voting rights? Is there a lot of preferred stock being allocated to people? Because at some point it can become very counterproductive. And so, you know, it's really a balancing act, you know, and this is what I alluded to, you know, in one of the earlier questions, not overly relying on any one strategy to appeal to investors, because, you know, you can often find yourself in trouble, especially as it relates to the cap table and board seats and things like that.
Thank you, Sean. Now we've really challenged our investors today because they are the best and we love learning from the best. So asking them an easy, fun question, just letting them relax a bit. What markets are the most ripe for disruption? What excites you the most as far as the future goes? I know, Ken, you're a big investor in augmented reality and some very cool stuff, AI stuff in it. Ken, what markets are ripe for disruption? What excites you? We want to hear all our panelists' thoughts. Ken, please go for it.
Sure. One of the areas that I'm fascinated by is blockchain and how that's going to change the world. I find blockchain, the way that it works and what it can do, has both positive and negative effects in the marketplace. So I think that's exciting. Augmented reality, I've got a piece of an augmented reality company, full disclosure, and I like the business. They're growing at an exponential rate right now. IoT is very interesting. Being a device maker for IoT, there's some challenges there. However, there's some transport IoT players that are taking the data off of the network and moving it faster and then putting it back to the dashboard of the individual that wants to see it. I find that fascinating. I think that as we move forward, that's going to be a very exciting industry. And then I'm simply amazed at the way that social communities work. And there's two types. There, of course, is that public social community like a Facebook world, but the private social communities, very similar to what we built with Capstack West, they seem to be flourishing, and the multiples are very good. And they also hide from Google. So Google doesn't really have the ability to reach into your world and tap all of the community members. So that means that now you actually control your data. So your data becomes even more valuable. So it's really interesting to watch that industry as well.
Thank you, Ted. Debs, tell us what excites you.
For me, it's pretty simple. Two major industries, real estate and infrastructure, if I can add that into one group, and second is logistics. The reason is simple. So our company is Africa focused. By 2050, the number of Africans on the planet are going to double. Essentially, they will probably be about 40% of the global workforce. What this means is that, and we're seeing it already, that some African countries already have incomes that are at par as Europe and the Americas. And so with all these rising incomes and all that, there is huge demand for the foreseeable future. I'm talking maybe as far as 2050 for infrastructure projects, for the ability to commute from point A to point B. So I stay here in China, and I can see very easily how difficult, well, not difficult, but how they've been able to channel the movement of people from place to place. You want to go from Shanghai to Beijing, you can use the bullet train. You want to go from this point to this point. So the point is, with so many people, and by the way, over 40% of them are actually younger, currently, are actually younger than 35. So how you would be able to house all these people, how you're going to be able to move them around, seems like an area that excites me, and it's an area that is very, very interesting for me.
Thank you, Debs. Having just come back from China and being a proud African, I can't agree more. So thank you. Sean, what excites you? What's ripe for disruption?
Yeah, this is definitely a very fun question. And to share a quick story, a friend of mine who was actually going through the fundraising process not too long ago, he and I had a really funny conversation where he was telling me how frustrating it was to be, he essentially said, I'm being lectured on a regular basis about not being innovative enough, but the people lecturing me are working in an industry, he's referring to the VC industry, that hasn't changed much since its inception. And so I think the most exciting arena for innovation will be disrupting VCs themselves, or at least the investment arena in a much broader sense. And I know, in recent times, we've had crowdfunding kind of enter the sphere. We've had various other kind of innovative finance models appear. But what I've noticed is that many of them end up collaborating with the venture capital industry, either because they get offered an investment that they can't turn down, and so instead of disrupting the industry, they end up collaborating with it, or just for whatever reasons. And so I'm definitely excited over the next few years to see what innovations within the finance and investment space are actually going to go out there and attempt to supplant VCs and even attempt, dare I say, to make VCs irrelevant. And I think that would be a good challenge for the incumbents to adjust to. And I think in the end, the founders will be the winners, because by having more players in that space, they'll be able to negotiate better terms. It won't be kind of a approach a VC is the end all be all. If I don't get a VC investment, I pretty much fail. So by adding more players into that space, founders will end up winning.
Thank you, Sean, and I'm so sorry. We've only got 2 minutes left. Very, very interesting, disruptive insights there. Josh, do you want to quickly tell us, and then we're just going to close up our session. It's a brilliant session today. Josh, please go for it.
Definitely. Coming from Wells Fargo, I'm glad I heard you say that. I think that crowdfunding is going to collaborate hardcore with blockchain and cryptocurrency. Mobile Go raised 53 million. Aragon Group raised 25 million within 15 minutes. The whole entire Reg CF, regulation crowdfunding space, in 13 months has only raised 43 million. So I'm excited to see what happens here.
Awesome, Josh. Awesome. I'm sorry to rush you. We're just running out of time now. I know you want to learn from our panelists. We're going to ask them each to prepare their tweet line of advice. We're going to come back to them right now and ask them for those tweets so we can go and apply them to our businesses. Thank you to everyone for an absolutely spectacular session. I know you want to learn from the best, and that's what we did today. Just to keep you posted on our upcoming sessions, next week, Wednesday, we've got a very cool session with some world-class experts joining us. It's titled, Do You Work Too Hard as an Entrepreneur? Take control of your life now. You definitely don't want to miss it. Keep us up to date on all your exciting news. You can email us at inspireme@onlinefiresidechat.com, and we'd love to hear from you. You can find me as well as our VIP guests on LinkedIn, as well as our community champions. Feel free to reach out to us. We love hearing from you, and we love hearing that you're succeeding as a result of our community. If you find there are entrepreneurs that could benefit from our fireside chats, please share the invitations with them. You know we're trying to get to a 100-country goal, and with all your help, we know we can make that come true. So we want to ask our experts for their tweet piece of advice. Debs, please tell us your tweets of advice.
Very quickly, the price of cocoa may fall, but the price of chocolate will always jump. Always start with why.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Ken?
If you want to know what industry to get into or what business to get into, look at the market. It's better to be lucky than good. And there's a great little video put out by Bill Gross from Idea Labs where they did a study on what companies make it and why. And if you haven't seen his startup TED Talk, it's well worth it. The market
Absolutely.
drives you.
Brilliant, brilliant advice. Thank you, Ken. Sean?
I would say with as innovative finance continues to develop, democratizing access to investments will transform everything. And so the goal would be achieving equity through equity.
Thank you, Sean. And Josh, please give us your tweet.
Steve Jobs quote, being the richest man in the cemetery doesn't matter to me. Going to bed at night saying we've done something wonderful. That's what matters to me. Make sure that your passion's driving you and not your greed.
That was beautifully said. I couldn't have said it better myself, and a wonderful way to end our session. My tweet piece of advice, be grateful for everything you have. You see, we're incredibly privileged to learn from the best, and it is a privilege to be an entrepreneur. So never forget how lucky we all are. Thanks again to everyone. Have a truly amazing week. On the count of 3, we're going to ask our experts to shout bye. Remember, keep hustling. Never, ever give up. So guys, 1, 2, 3. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Bye.